There's something strange about the way we gather in the dark. Something ancient. We lock the doors. We turn off the lights. And we press play on murder, demons, shadows, screams. And then we call it fun. But what if it's not just fun? What if our fascination with horror isn't just about adrenaline or aesthetics, but about something older, something hidden, something that feeds in silence, something that doesn't care whether we believe in it or not? In this video, we're going deeper. We'll explore what science says, what trauma explains, and what ancient texts have warned us about long before horror had soundtracks and box office numbers. This is not a video about movies, this is a video about desire. About why we run toward the dark and what might be waiting there. Chapter 1: The Evolutionary Origins of Fear. Fear, the one emotion we never have to learn. Babies flinch at loud noises, animals freeze when they sense danger. Even before we know language, we know how to be afraid. But what is fear really? It's not weakness. It's not irrational. Fear is intelligence at full speed. A warning system built deep into the architecture of life. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a dense forest 80,000 years ago. You hear a rustle. You see nothing. Your mind doesn't wait for proof. It assumes danger. That's your amygdala, an almond-shaped cluster in the brain kicking into action. It doesn't reason. It reacts. It hijacks your body, raises your heart rate, sharpens your senses, floods you with adrenaline. This is the fight or flight response, one of the oldest survival systems we carry. It kept your ancestors alive, and it still shapes how you react today. But here's a twist. That same ancient alarm system now lights up when we watch a film, read a story, or walk through a dark hallway alone. Horror is no longer something we avoid. It's something we invite in. Why? Because fear, when it's safe, becomes addictive. It's a roller coaster for the soul. Our mind knows we're safe, but our body believes the threat is real. And in that tension, we feel more alive. Horror taps into the oldest version of ourselves, the primal self. And we love it because it reminds us what it means to survive. So the next time you feel your pulse quicken during a horror story, remember, you're not broken, you're not strange, you're human. And the fear you feel, that's not entertainment, that's evolution at work. But fear isn't just biological, it's also spiritual. Because while our ancestors feared lions and shadows, they also feared what they couldn't see at all. The unknown, the cursed, the sacred, and that's where we go next. In Chapter 2, we'll leave behind the body and enter the soul, to ask a question as old as fear itself. What if the things we're afraid of are real? Chapter 2: When Fear Became Sacred. The Supernatural Origins of Horror. Long before Netflix, before film, before ink ever touched parchment, fear was already telling stories. Early humans didn't just fear death, they feared what came after. Thunder wasn't just a storm, it was the anger of gods. Shadows weren't just darkness, they were spirits, ancestors, curses, illness, possession, nightmares, messages from another realm. To them, horror was not fiction, it was faith. Across continents and cultures, the same themes appear. The underworld, the soul leaving the body, the dead returning, beings who exist between this world and the next. The horror story began as scripture. The Babylonians feared Lamashtu, a demoness who stole infants in the night. The Egyptians had Ammit, a soul-eating beast waiting to devour the unworthy. In ancient Greece, the dead who weren't buried properly would rise in torment. The revenants, ancestors of today's zombies. And in every case, horror served a purpose. It warned, it instructed, it bound communities together. It kept people aligned with the spiritual order or terrified of violating it. But here's the part we often miss. Horror wasn't separate from religion. It was religion. Rituals to ward off spirits, symbols drawn to keep demons out, sacred objects treated with dread and reverence. These were not props. These were weapons in a war between light and darkness. Horror gave form to the unseen. It named the nameless, and in doing so, gave early humans a sense of control. But as the world changed, so did fear. The age of ritual gave way to reason. The gods were questioned, the demons renamed. And yet, horror did not vanish, it simply evolved. In Chapter 3, we'll enter the age of science, where horror found new life in cold logic, and the monsters began wearing lab coats. Chapter 3, When Logic Meets Dread, the Scientific Horror. The age of reason arrived with microscopes, equations, and revolutions. Suddenly, demons were explained as delusions. Ghosts were illusions. Madness had names. The universe wasn't ruled by spirits, but by forces, gravity, magnetism, electricity. Humanity stood taller than ever before, wiser, sharper, safer, or so we thought. Because horror didn't die in the light of knowledge, it adapted. It hid inside the very tools we use to escape it. In the 1800s, Mary Shelley gave us Frankenstein, a monster born not of magic, but of science. Victor Frankenstein wasn't a sorcerer, he was a researcher, and his creature, a question. What if the power to create life comes with consequences we can't control? This was the birth of a new kind of fear, not the wrath of gods, but the arrogance of men. From there, the monsters multiplied. H.G. Wells imagined invisible men, time machines, biological experiments gone wrong. Poe whispered of madness with surgical precision. Lovecraft took it further, warning that true horror lies in knowledge itself. The more we understand the universe, the more we realize how little we matter. Even today, our fears echo this era. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, surveillance, diseases without cures. Modern horror doesn't ask, what if the dead return? It asks, what if we are the problem? Horror evolved, but one thing never changed. It always holds up a mirror. Whether it's ancient spirits or scientific nightmare, We use horror to explore ourselves. But there's one realm that mixes both the sacred and the logical. A space where horror becomes not just personal, but deeply psychological. In Chapter 4, we descend into the mind to confront the monsters that live inside us. Chapter 4. The Mind as a Haunted House. Psychological Horror. Not every horror story needs a monster. Sometimes the monster is memory or guilt or grief that never healed. Psychological horror isn't loud, it whispers, it lingers. It questions your reality until you don't know what's real or who you are anymore. And in many ways, it's the most human form of fear. As psychology emerged as a science, so did a new kind of horror. One focused not on the external world, but the inner one. Dreams, madness, repression, trauma. Alfred Hitchcock turned a motel shower into a place of terror. Stanley Kubrick made a father's descent into madness the true villain. Jordan Peele revealed that horror could live in smiles, teacups, and polite conversation. These stories hit different because they don't say, "Look out, something's coming." They say, "Look in, something's already here." And here's what makes it so powerful. You can't escape yourself. You can leave a haunted house, you can defeat a creature, but you can't outrun your own mind. That's why psychological horror stays with us long after the credits roll. It reveals that fear isn't always about survival. Sometimes it's about identity. What if I'm losing control? What if I'm not who I think I am? What if the thing I fear most is me? These are the questions that haunt us in silence, in our dreams, in our doubts, in our deepest loneliness. And horror once again becomes the flashlight in the dark. It shines a beam not on the world around us, but on the shadows we carry inside. But even the mind isn't the final frontier of fear, because sometimes horror steps beyond the personal and becomes collective. It feeds on culture, on history, on the wounds of entire generations. In Chapter 5, we explore horror not as a personal nightmare, but as a reflection of society's darkest truths. Chapter 5. Cultural Shadows. Horror as Social Commentary. Horror has always been political, not with slogans or speeches, but with symbols, metaphors, monsters. It creeps through the cracks of history. It festers in inequality. It echoes in the silence left by injustice. Because horror isn't just about fear, it's about what we fear to admit. In the 1950s, American horror films were filled with aliens and invasions. But they weren't really about space. They were about the Red Scare, the Cold War, the fear that the enemy could be anyone, even your neighbor. In the 1970s, horror turned inward. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Dawn of the Dead. Beneath the gore were questions about consumerism, capitalism, post-Vietnam trauma. In recent years, Jordan Peele's Get Out peeled back the polite mask of racism. Ari Aster's Hereditary whispered about generational trauma and broken families. These films didn't invent fear, they revealed it. They held up a mirror, not to ghosts, but to us. Horror does what polite society often avoids. It names the wound. It doesn't offer solutions, but it won't let us look away. When horror confronts racism, poverty, misogyny, war, surveillance, it forces us to feel what statistics can't. Fear, not just as entertainment, but as empathy. Because fear has power, it's primal, immediate, and when used intentionally, it becomes a language that goes beyond logic. In that way, a horror becomes prophetic. And yet, for all its darkness, horror also hints at something deeper, something hopeful, something holy. Because hidden inside every scream is the longing for safety, for peace, for light. In our final chapter, we'll ask a question few horror stories dare to voice. What if our obsession with fears is really a search for meaning, for hope, for God? Chapter 6. The Sacred Ache Behind Fear. All horror stories end the same way. The lights come back on. The screen fades to black. The heartbeat slows. And the silence returns. But long after the film ends, something stays. A whisper. A wait. A question. Why do I keep coming back to this? Why do we seek out what terrifies us? Why do we dream of haunted houses, cursed places, and worlds where everything goes wrong? The answer is simpler and deeper than we realize. Horror is about survival, about justice, about seeing the darkness and naming it. But underneath all that, horror is about a cry for light. Every ghost story is secretly a cry for peace. Every apocalypse, a hunger for restoration. Every monster, a symbol of the chaos we wish we could tame. We scream because we want to be saved, and the deeper the fear, the deeper the longing. In that way, horror becomes sacred, not because it is good, but because it reminds us that something good is missing, that this world is broken, that we are vulnerable, that we are not enough to fix it alone. And so we watch, we listen, we tremble, because deep down we know the fear we feel is the echo of a deeper truth. We were made for something more than pain, more than fear, more than this world. Horror, in its own strange way, points to hope. Not as a gimmick, not as denial, but as a promise. That light is real, that good is stronger, that death is not the end. And maybe, just maybe, that longing we feel in the dark is the voice of God calling us home. If you've made it this far, thank you. This wasn't just a video. It was a journey through darkness, through doubt, through everything that keeps us awake at night. But maybe now you see fear a little differently. not just as something to avoid, but as something to understand, something that can reveal, something that at its deepest level can lead us home. Horror shows us the cracks, but also the light that wants to break through. It reminds us that even when everything falls apart, there's still something worth longing for. And that longing, that ache for safety, for justice, for peace, that's not weakness. That's a sign you were made for more. So if this resonated with you, I invite you to stay. This channel is changing, shifting from fear for fear's sake to a place where we explore what fear reveals about the human soul and what it might be pointing us toward truth, toward meaning, toward hope. Like, share, subscribe if you feel called to walk with me. And most of all, keep asking the hard questions, because the answers are closer than they seem.